Hey, Dr. Steve Chee here, integrative East-West physician and somatic IFS therapist. I'm really excited to be sharing this interview I had with Dr. Tom Holmes, who has a PhD in counseling psychology and has been in the mental health field for over 50 years, from training graduate students to teaching holistic health at the university level to leading programs internationally, and has authored a couple books in there as well. And this conversation is going to be all about integrating spirituality and psychology, its impact on health, and the power of the group. And I hope you enjoy this. So thank you so much, Tom, for taking some time out of your busy life to be here with me and my audience. And I'm really excited, honestly, that you're here. I'm a big fan of yours. I feel such great resonance in what you do, what you're doing in the world. For those watching this, you know, just the integration of spirituality, of working in groups, and of doing parts work or internal family systems. I mean, just this constellation in and of itself, and the way that you've been doing this, just from our conversations between the two of us, I definitely consider you a friend, a colleague, a mentor, and just highly respect what it is, and really like a soul friend, somebody who's just very similar in a similar journey. So, with that, I just invite you to share, maybe a little bit about yourself that that be useful for them to understand about your background.
Okay, well, thank you, Stephen. I'm delighted to be able to be here and to share. And I taught at the university. I taught for many years in a holistic health program where we had a mind, body, spirit perspective. And probably one of my weaknesses always been, or the less developed side of my work, is the body side, and especially the whole energetic body, and especially that arising out of some of the traditions from traditional Chinese medicine. And it's always been an interest area of mine. So the fact that you have IFS background, bring that other background to it in your whole medical background in integrative medicine, plus the therapy side of things, that's a nice integration. And I think there's also that heart resonance. So, um, I've been in the mental health field since the 70s, so 50 years, and working all the way from community mental health to teaching in social work, to having a master's in clinical psych, a doctorate in counseling psych. So I've been also kind of in a lot of the different fields where people arise into the therapeutic field. And the integration of that, one of the things I liked about IFS is it's a systemic model, right? So you can kind of use these systemic principles, whether you're working with the mental field. It gave actually, we're working with systemic model for the community, systemic model for the family, all of the biological systems that are integrated in. And when I found IFS, then I had a psychological model that was systemic, and that was good and really helped with the integration process. So it's one of the places where we first joined was through that IFS connection, and it's one of the reasons why IFS was very important to me. The other is that as just the nature of the way it's structured, that model, spirituality flows into it. And
Nice.
at some point, we can talk a little further about that. But spirituality is becoming really the major focus of my work now is the integration of spirituality and psychotherapy with a special focus on IFS.
Yeah,
So,
I love. Yeah, we can talk about it now. This if you're
sure.
open to it.
Well, I want to kind of define what spirituality is for me, right?
Yeah.
So, because it's often when people go, that's, and what is that? And for me,
Yes.
it comes from spirituality is based in the word spirit, which is spiritus in Latin, which one of the Oxford English Dictionary main meanings of that is the breath of life.
Mm,
Spirituality to me is that which makes you alive. That's what gives you this sense of being alive in the world and flowing into that living energy,
mm,
right? So helping a person connect to their spiritual life is helping to connect to that which enlivens them.
yes.
And there's a breath for it has two words in Latin. One is spiritus, the other is anima. and the anima is the kind of animating of the physical. So spirit is the breath of life. That's the source. It's sort of the divine source. Ruach in Hebrew, ruh in Arabic. It's this breath that comes into the world through us, I sense, is one of the ways it arrives in the world. And as it takes form in Latin in the anima. Actually, the word for that breath in Greek is pneuma, and in the physical form, it's psyche, right? So actually, the breath comes in to the psyche and then manifests as the different parts of ourselves. And so I'll talk a little bit more later, but that it's that interface between the spirit, the breath of life, and how it manifests in physical form in us through our parts and through other aspects of our physical dimension. Um, so
Yes.
that has been, for me, it's important for people to know that's my definition. Religion, on the other hand, comes from religere in Latin, which means to bind to or to come together, but it often means committing oneself to a set of dogma, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
it's a structure. And I like to see spirituality. Well, if you were to look at maybe spirituality as the breath of life, but also the flame, the burning flame of spirit as a candle, the light on a candle. And the religion is a little bit like that glass, the hurricane glass that goes around a candle so that you can carry it and the wind doesn't just blow it out. So religion is that structure to our practice, whatever tradition it's in, that allows that spirit, that thing that makes us alive, be protected a little bit from the winds of life,
That
right?
is really one of the most beautiful definitions of religion that I think I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Really, and it feels very honoring of its intention, of what it's actually attempting to do. I mean, of course, there's a lot of harm that has occurred in the name of religion, but you're speaking to the protective. There's that protective
Well, and
element.
what happens if the religion, if the glass gets too closed and rigid, the candle goes out. Right? I mean, if
Yeah,
you if there's no air in there, if that's not open,
it's
the
true.
light goes out, and that's the same for religion.
And this is like almost becomes a weapon. I mean, this
Yeah,
you could poke somebody with that.
yeah. Well, and that whole the way that religion has then come into politics and the political systems throughout history
Yes.
is a
But
whole nother.
there's
Yeah,
this opening though. Like it's in if it can move in the way in which the light that is within that can emerge. To me, this is it's a very useful kind of orientation
and
to
the
hold with that.
yeah, and the universalist tradition that I'm in honors all religious paths as a potential spiritual path, and as actually a path of the heart, right?
Yes.
So that any of the religions can be that. And the work for my work, I would say, is to help people find that which awakens them into life.
Well, and to me, and if I just going off of this, if you don't mind, it's like it also can really enhance. I mean, it's a form for the formless, right? That which is
Mm,
invisible. And so
right,
how can we use that as a way of enhancing the light to emerge? Like in whatever ritual or form or structure, I mean, in its purest sense, ideally, that which does that would be a quote unquote healthy form of that, right?
right. Now that's a good point. That is how one notices it. It's not itself is not visible, but you visit it's visible when it touches form. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
it's great.
Anyways, please continue.
Well, and then for me, I've always been interested in the spiritual side of things. But it was actually my clients that brought me to bringing it into the real integration with psychotherapy. So when I was doing my doctoral internship, I'd already been working for 6 or 8 years as a therapist at the master's level. And I started having these clients that were having these kind of religious and spiritual issues that seemed to be somehow connected to what their psychological issues were, but I didn't quite know how to do that. And and then in the small town that I was working with in Michigan, for some reason, they had a flyer on the bulletin board that said spirituality and counseling. right? With Pir Vilayat and Ayat Khan. I thought Pir Vilayat and
Oh.
Sufi master. I thought, what's a Sufi master? And who's this name? I don't know about that, but I like the idea of spirituality and counseling because this was in the late 70s, early 80s, and it wasn't addressed at all at the university level. So I went to that workshop and I found this path, this universalist path that said all religions can be a path of the heart. And somehow I came back from that just really sensing the importance of spirituality. And so I started working with this one client, and somehow it's like she arrived in my life to tell me this was important because she was someone who had been depressed for years and years and years. All the medication, all the therapy was not really doing anything. And she was a believer. She was one of the key people for me that made me want to go to that, but she was cut off from her faith. And she also had a really bad case of psoriasis, right? And when I came back, I started working with her and I found out that, well, she had been sexually abused by her priest, right? So
Mm.
this is like one of those really double wounds, right? You both have the person um, uh, that wounds you, that should be a source of inspiration in your life, and they've
Yes.
cut you off from your spiritual life as a source of healing.
Yes.
So what I found then was we're somehow working together with her, we found a saint, Dymphna, who was a saint for sexually abused women and
Wow.
for a mental health from the 16th century. And she liked that idea because she was very much a believing Catholic. And so she started to pray to Dymphna. And all we did in therapy after that for the next few weeks was form the question. She went home and prayed. And oh my gosh, after 3 weeks, her depression went away.
Wow.
Psoriasis went away. And it was sort of like, all right, what's this? I've been doing psychotherapy for 6 years. It doesn't change this fast. This isn't something that normally happens like this. So I really realized then that here's this source. I don't know what it is. I don't, all, but I know that a person's faith and their ability
Yes.
to connect to that faith and bring that faith to the daily struggles that they're facing can bring tremendous healing into a person's life.
This is what an incredible story. And it's so part of what I love about it is it's so honoring of her and what was important to her. And the mechanism, you're mentioning all paths, being, leading to God. And so honoring that spiritual tradition for her, and then two, just the source of the empowerment for her to step into to reconnect with her own kind of using that candle in the light of that, right? Is that kind of what you're speaking to
Exactly. And
reconnect
that's
into
the
that?
key thing of being able to help them to find their path, not my path. What didn't come from any ideas that I had. I just said, oh, I found out what her tradition was, searched a little bit in that tradition to see if there were some places that she could reconnect, helped her find those places to reconnect. And then she did the rest, right?
Yeah. And it just speaks to the power of that. And then because to me, as you were talking, and I love that this case study that you're mentioning speaks to, because you were talking about the anima, right? And the how the light comes into the form of the body. And I was going to mention, in your experience, what's the impact on physical health? Because it's almost like it's intended. I mean, I would argue, right? The physical form is intended to have that emerge, that light. And then, of course, health would be a facet of that.
Right. And in this instance, it was sort of like for whatever reason, the main case that was given to me by the universe, right, was this one where there was a clear physical symptom that changed as well as the psychological symptoms. And so, and we know that psoriasis has like a component that can be affected by well, really the whole harmony in the inner system,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
If you can bring that harmony in the inner system, then the natural healing forces in the body now have a chance to do what they would do, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. And so you were saying as your journey, you were presented with this early. And so how did this impact your journey? and with
Well, I
spirituality
was,
from there?
I was had to do my comprehensive exams and my dissertation and all this stuff. So it was one of those times in life. But what I realized from that was that my own spiritual life had not been nourished for a long time. I had left the traditional Christian church 10 years earlier, and it had gotten too narrow and confining for me in terms of the church that I would been in. And so I just began to follow this universalist path for the next 10 years. And then I also started trying to find authors that were writing about this. So Jung and Eric Fromm and people like that were writing. But what I found was most of it was intellectual, like it was
Yes.
intellectual discussion of it,
Yes.
right? And so, and it was also, I mean, I was still working in community mental health, and it wasn't a setting where at that point spirituality was assumed to be something that you would even bring up, right? So it felt like I had to wait until the person, brought me into that as a dimension of the work that they wanted to do. And after, as I developed in this area, I realized that actually taking a spiritual history, like you take any other kind of history of the main factors in their life, just asking them where religion or spirituality, what role it had in their life is something that's important to do in whatever setting you're in, just because it's such a key variable in people's lives. And for some will say, well, that's just not a factor in my life. And others will say, well, I was really wounded by the church. And others will say, it's always been a great source for me. And then I can say, well, do you want that to be part of what we're doing? And
Yes.
right. Um, so it took me some years to figure out how to integrate it, but it wasn't until IFS that I learned that it started spontaneously jumping into the work when it wasn't even discussed as a topic.
Yes. And that's because it's a system. This IFS is a systems based. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, well, let me give you, for those of you who might know IFS, if you don't, I'll try to outline it enough. But one of the things we do in IFS is we work with the different parts of a person that might be struggling, and they come into relationship to this part from what IFS calls self, what I like to see as the heart. And if we find a part that's, say, been traumatized at some point and is carrying that trauma, then we work with that part and usually help them to find a way to heal and unburden themselves from the residue of that trauma, and then be able to come back into the system. And I had just done some of that work I was working with a co-therapist, because that was one of the ways that I trained people in the early years, was just to do co-therapy with them with IFS. And this woman had had one of those beautiful healings where a very small infantile exiled part was kind of brought out of the light where it had been in protection and came back into the system, right?
Yes.
And the whole system was joyous that this part was now
Mm.
there and safe, and the system had been made safe for it to come back, right? And we were just sort of basking in the light of those times when this healing process takes place. The person is deeply centered in self. The parts are coming into harmony. It's really nice. And um, and my colleague, not having all of the protocol rhythms there, she said, "Well, can you ask her what that light is that's there, right?
Yeah.
That it came out of?"
Yes.
She turned towards the light and asked that question, "Well, what are you?" And the light responded, "I am the window to your soul."
Mm.
And this is a story that I tell in actually both of my books, the first one and the second one. And she said, I am the window to you. And she started crying with an ecstatic joy. Right?
Yes.
She was having this epiphany in my office
Wow.
in the middle of a community mental health center, right? And it was like, what is that? Right? What was that? And it changed her whole system. It became flooded. All of her parts just kind of felt flooded by this profound light and joy. And I was like, oh my goodness. And we didn't try to do it. But what we did too was turn towards it and open to it, through my colleagues' wisdom to do that. Right.
Yes.
And so that said to me, oh my goodness, why aren't we using this? Why aren't we why aren't we bringing this into the therapy? And now I see how to do it more. Whereas before it was like it was an experience that happened, but it was a certain context. And now with IFS, I found, oh, there are many pathways. And in my book, the second book, The Parts Work, A Path of the Heart, that's basically a book sharing stories about how spirituality comes into the therapeutic process as a healing power, as a healing source. And so that all started though, really again through my clients' guidance, right?
Wow.
Um,
Yeah, and what a profound story. And to me, I mean, and I'm hearing this in you, it's like when that happens, we're all in awe.
exactly.
I mean, and then who is being healed, really?
Well, I mean, and yeah, that was the other thing. It's like both my colleague and myself were deeply enriched by that. And um, and actually every time that the clients touch those sources in themselves, that energetic resonance and energy all impacts our system, and it will impact the systems that they encounter as they flow forward in their lives,
Yeah.
right? So by opening the window to that, feeling it, giving it presence, it comes into the world in a whole new way.
You know, I love, I love that you're mentioning there's this book that you have which has more stories in case people want, to read more about that. And I'm curious, just in hearing this, to me, a part of how I'm hearing it is your way of being and it permission giving to allow one for that conversation to even come forward. And there's one, it's beginning with an awareness of that. And then there's a permission giving. And then there's this, my sense in how you're describing this process is you're in a way allowing that to come through you as a way of relating to this individual that then gives them, and then it's right, it's the relationship with you, with them with themselves. Like how much of that is a part of this emergence of this light and this healing that you're referencing?
Yeah, very much. That's a really good segue from that. You know, one of the things that I didn't mention, so we had this sort of spiritual ruach, spiritus breath, and we have the manifest breath in the parts and in form in the anima in the psyche. And but in between that, almost all these traditions talk about the heart as being the place through which that spirit and light and love flows into the parts of the system and into the world. And so it's that I really see that as the same thing as the IFS self, because
Yes.
it's not a part, it's not the concretized aspects of who we are, but it's this place where when we're in that place, we're both connected to this source of life and we're connected to the world through our parts. And the qualities that are there are this compassion, this love, this openness, this calmness, this understanding. Those are the compassions that or the feelings that naturally arise in this state when we're in this state.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, beautiful.
And you know, one of the things that one of my main sort of interests these days, and has been for the last 20 or 30 years, is studying different spiritual traditions and how they describe this heart.
Yes.
Right. So we've talked about that a little bit in the Shin, in the Chinese system, and where I don't understand that as deeply, and I'm hoping to in coming years. But in the Islamic system, especially the Sufi, the mystical side of that, this whole kalb or leb is the center, and in Buddhism, it's sort of I like to see in Buddhism this. I mean, the Heart Sutra is a key sutra in the Buddhist traditions that I've been in contact with, but also the Brahma Vihara, the qualities of the heart are key. So um, the loving kindness, the compassion, the sympathetic joy, and the equanimity, those are all described for thousands and thousands of years as what does it look like when spirit manifests, right? So then it has these qualities of this calm, this equanimity. It has these qualities of compassion. It has these qualities of a deep kind of joy, not a temporary sort of joy,
Mhm.
deep joy. And and in the Christian tradition, it shows up, in like the Corinthians 13, what is the nature of love, right? With its love is patient, love is kind, love endures all, tolerates all, holds no, all those qualities that you find in the agape love
Yes.
are showing up, right? So to me, those are all qualities of self. They're all qualities of heart, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, and to me, I love this question. What does it look like how spirit manifests? And to me, I love, and maybe you want to speak to this, like why that's so useful for you or why that inspires you or touches you so much to see from so many different traditions and throughout history, through so many different cultures. What is that touch inside of you that's so enlivening to you?
I think that what one of the things is what does it look like when you're in the center of this what this particular spiritual tradition offers? So this one, the mind's the path of the heart. Like how do people show up in the world through whatever this belief system that they carry? So for example, the Vietnamese Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, right? I mean, he to me represents sort of this, he calls it an engaged Buddhism,
Hmm.
but it's bringing those qualities of the heart into the world. And what does that look like when it's there? Um, and I like to use the Chinese symbol. Maybe you could put it up in there up for the heart, which is
Yes.
the symbol of Xin, right? Um, but what is and the word for virtue is like path of the perfect heart, right?
Yes.
So I love to use that as the symbol for talking about it. And what does that look like when it manifests? For Thich Nhat Hanh, that meant I was at the first time I met him, we were at a workshop with 600 people, a mindfulness workshop in 1989 or so. And in the center of these 600 were 60 Vietnam vets. And he was making it his business to heal our soldiers from what they had done in his country. And I was
Mm.
thinking, whoa, where does that heart space come from? That not only do you like have intellectual understanding and compassion for those soldiers who did such things, but you actually offer them healing and
Yeah.
wholeness. And at the end of that retreat, many of these soldiers said that for the first time, and it was 15 years almost since the war, they had slept through the night without nightmares, right? Because they had been
Wow.
doing that war in themselves all that time. And through this practice that he offered them and that his monks and nuns offered them, they were able to free themselves from some of the burdens that they had been carrying from the war.
Wow. One of the things that really strikes me in this story, and especially in relationship to your story, is it's a similar type of a thing where this is you're there, like you're with a client, like what is what is this emerging? What is this that's happening? And in the same way, like there's this group of 600, like what is the space of the heart that is allowing this type of transformation or this touching people in this way? And I'm curious, and because I'm seeing this as just a part of who you are as in your own connection, right? And how that has manifested and where's the heart for you now and how, because I know you do work with groups, for example, and I'm seeing this more and more in your story.
Yeah, and I guess part of it was I began 55 years ago or more. I started working in the psychology field at a time when encounter groups and humanistic psychology were there, and so I had some sense of the power of groups. Um, and there's various groups that would happen throughout time, but um, when I began to work with maybe it came from me working first at the university with classes. And as I was teaching in holistic health, I could gradually turn my classes more into some real experiential processes, right? Because that was part of the holistic process. And at the same time, I had been learning these group circle meditations in the Universalist path. They're called Dances of Universal Peace. And so in
Mm,
our groups, we would sing together and chant together and move together in specific ways. And what happened in those moving meditations and singing in community was this incredible heart space came up.
yes.
You could tune the group easily by having them come together with sound practice, with movement together. Um, and the research now shows too that just singing together brings a strong resonance and harmony into the group. So uh, it was so profound that I thought, well, let's use those kinds of things to create healing environments that can take place in groups. And I was working with IFS and I was thinking, well, how can I use IFS in groups, right? And by creating the spiritual container, which is in the IFS language, maybe like self in the group awakening and coming into
Yes.
the foreground, then I could do some guided things in the group that were where healing was able to take place that was actually much deeper than it could happen in like even a one-on-one session at times. And through the group self energy in IFS or the group heart attunement that was arising. So I started doing that more than 30 years ago and have just continued to evolve that as a way of doing. It's most of the work that I do now is in groups.
Yeah. No, there's so rich. Thank you for sharing all this. There's so many different threads I want to go down. So, um, I'm so curious first, just well, first it's just, and maybe, I mean, you kind of already been speaking to this, and I know we've talked about this before about why having a spiritual context is so important in your groups. Because I know that there's like, you're not, you're, to me, and that's not for everybody, but to me, I'm curious, for you, in the terms of the work, like why is that important?
Yeah. Part of it is, there's several things, one is that I feel that, and you spoke to this a little bit earlier about the power of the relationship, and was I started talking about the self and the heart. And one of the reasons that's so important is because the qualities of a therapeutic relationship, one of the things that the research has shown that in psychotherapeutic research, the therapeutic relationship is 50% of the change factor, right? And
Hmm.
what are those conditions? Unconditional positive regard, non-possessive warmth, accurate empathy, respect, mutual respect. All of these things, if they're there, change happens, right? And the another 25% of that change comes from the expectation that it will work, and another than 25% from the method, right? So, um, but what's key, and if the relationship is not there, then those other factors don't make any difference.
Yes, of
So it's the
course.
foundation.
Yeah.
And Carl Rogers, even back, 50 years ago or more, was 60 years ago, when he was doing his work, he talked obviously about relationship. That was the key thing that he offered. And he said, if I am in this particular space when I am with the person, and he described those qualities of the heart really,
Yes.
then this change will happen, right? And so we know now that it has to do with this relational thing. The research supports that. And yet, how do you manage to have those qualities in a sustainable way, right?
Yes.
And all of our training usually goes at a cognitive level. We're trying to figure out ideas that will help us understand what's going on and what to do and categorize this and categorize that and move through this process and move.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's all cognitive, right? And
Yes.
it can be helpful and it can guide us and give us some framework, but it's not the essence of what's happening.
Yes.
The relational is the essence of what's happening. So one of my groups are largely focused, I like to now call them like tuning the heart of the healer, right? So it's
Mm.
healing the healer and tuning the heart of the healer, meaning if the people can come out of that workshop more deeply centered in their self, in IFS terms, in their heart, then the work that they do, no matter what model they're using, will have more impact in the world.
And to me, I love what you're sharing, this line that you just said about and it's so true. We're often trying to figure out how can I make this sustainable. I love that line because it's so true, and it speaks to the finiteness of often of the mind. Actually, paradoxically, the mind, which has a limitless capacity, the parts that are operating only on that level run into a wall. And to
Right.
me, you're not saying this directly, but I'm sure your reaction to this. But if people can tap into the the field of the heart, which is in it, and especially in the spiritual heart, even more, maybe more, and this is languaging we're playing with here, but it's like because the spiritual heart is infinite, it doesn't have the limitations of resource. In fact, its nature is to expand and evolve and to grow and just keep opening as our own universe is
Yeah,
revealing to us. I mean, the physical universe, right? And so it's a kind of coming into harmony with this greater ocean of that.
absolutely. And if we come together using ancient phrases that were used to awaken that space,
Yes.
awaken those qualities, and we do that in a group, then what flows into everyone is both the expanded nature of that in the group and really then connecting to all of that expansion that arises through each individual. So you have this pooling of connection to that source, that infinite heart.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And and it's so fascinating. And I appreciate that you using the ancient kind of words or ancient techniques because to me, there's an honoring of that which was and the vast histories and different our historical history, right? And then there's a way in which it comes into the now and is moving forward into now and beyond. So it's not just about the past, but it's about honoring the past in a way that's alive now. And it's also, to me, the way you're doing is very much integrated with what we know now too. So there's right. So there's a way in which, and I don't know if it resonate with what I'm sharing about this.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I think that, what are those words that live for thousands of years and that are used for thousands of years by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people as part of their spiritual practice? Those are very special things, right? They have this living power that has moved across the generations and across time and space to us now, right? So when we all come together and use those sound practices, whether it's a mantra or a wazifa or some other sound practice, those are things that have a long history of awakening certain qualities, right?
Yes.
And so if you can it allows us to bring an intentionality to, okay, what do we want to have be sort of in the foreground of our being now? And
Yes.
what Thich Nhat Hanh would talk about watering the seeds of particular mental formations or particular states of mind. And so all of those things can water the seeds of those states of mind and activity.
Yes. And then maybe you can speak to this too, because I know you know many of these words. And because to me, what I find so beautiful about many of them is there's a they speak this language of the heart and its relationship with whatever you want to call God, love, universe, whatever. They speak to a relationship dynamic. To me, it is often an invitation to move into that. And there's lots of sacred, the reverence, the love, it's this, right, and the mystical elements to it. The word, one word or short phrase can in some ways capture such a profound um, relationship dynamic with that.
Right. And those are great treasures, I think, to and for you to sense what's calling forward in you now. And you can use also, current words, but we know the power of inviting in those qualities into us. In recent years, and we'll maybe talk about this more at some point, but um, I really like the work that was done, the Christian tradition, the language that the historical Jesus would have spoken was Aramaic.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Um, uh, a lot of the text that we have comes through Greek, which was more the kind of lingua franca and the kind of language of commerce and um, uh, the but the Aramaic was what he would have spoken, and it changes the meaning of certain words so much, and they have such profound sound meaning when you go back into those, especially the Semitic languages have a lot of sound and vibration in them, and they're poetic, right? So the first word of the Lord's Prayer is not our Father. In terms of Aramaic, that would be Abba.
Mm.
Avun, and Avun Ab Ab is referencing father, but Avun is a much more expansive word, and it's really more gender free, and it means what is the source of life? So Jesus said, "Let me teach you how to pray," and the first thing you do is tune to the source of all things, basically to that spiritus that we were talking about.
Yes, yes, yes.
And the word is avun, right? And avun de bashmaya is the source of all things that exists in the realm of light and vibration is a direct translation more from the Aramaic, right?
Wow.
Which is translated as heaven, but like this realm of light and vibration. So
Can
it's
you say that one more time? It translates as,
avun de bashmaya, and
and what is it translated as?
avun, it's translated as um, tuned to the source, the avun, um, the birther of all things,
The birther of all, the source, the birth. Wow.
source, the birther of all things that and that exists in the realm of light and vibration, right? So it's just an invitation. Actually, the first line is an invitation to tune into that which you consider the source. That's the way I like to see it. So tune
Yes.
to the source for yourself. And if avun is a word that helps you do that, but something else can, some people use aum. It's actually a very similar sound practice. Um, has similar vibrational capacities. And the ah is the sound of the heart. So all the practices like salam, ah salam, like as peace, the word peace, that all has activation of the heart vibrational qualities. So just by going that alone awakens the heart. It's sort of like a self practice in a sense, right? Just tuning to right?
Yes. I, and it's really, really beautiful. And one of the things I'm struck is just even by this story that you've told us from where you began, that clinical encounter and that, the woman, the practicing Catholic, that woman's story and the discover your own curiosity about the role of spirituality, like something in you drawing that, and then your own journey with that. And to me, where and how you're guiding people now. And it seems very, and because how much that journey of wanting to help people to find that which makes them alive, right?
Right. And one of the things I started this when I was teaching holistic health at the university, I would share with people a wide range of spiritual practices and say, look, your job is to kind of sense what works for you. And actually most people, for example, really can't really do just straight sitting meditation. It doesn't work for
Yeah,
them much, right?
yeah,
But maybe walking meditation or maybe qigong or tai chi, something like that can work, a moving kind of meditative state, or just breath practices, or there's just a lot of things. So I want people to experiment and to see, okay, what helps you, and the same is with inviting people to find poems or prayers or other passages that mean something to them, and then to begin to use them as part of their inner practice of just repeating a poem that represents a quality that they might like to have. So an example of that, let's say we go back to this what makes you alive,
Yeah.
right? I invite people to kind of maybe look at the Christian mystic Hildegard of Bingen, who lived in the 12th century. And she talked about Christ as the greening power, Veriditas, right? Veriditas is a mixture of the word in Latin of greening and of truth. So it's like the greening truth, Veriditas, that which makes things green. So it's the greening power. And and then she said, like, when you touch this spirit, she said, those who taste this dew, they yearn for heavenly things. And
Mm.
they carry within refreshing, fulfilling, greening love with which they hasten to the aid of those in need. Right.
Wow.
So it's this greening love. It's this love that why I like the idea of the greening power, because to me, that's what happens when the psychotherapy is working right. We have a system that's constricted, the parts are in conflict, the parts are in pain, the parts are in protection. And
Yes.
they open that, this spirit energy is beginning to flow, and that allows their life to green again, to grow again, to
Yes.
again, right? So it's this greening love, this love that helps people to renew, to return to the essence of who they are, right?
Yes.
And when you touch it, it automatically wishes to flow into the world in service.
It does. It is because it's its nature.
Yes, that's its
Yes.
nature. Yes,
Yes. And to me, it's also in just referencing like the power of doing that in a group,
yeah.
right?
And the way this arose was I was a group working with a group of people, and they had the intention of deepening their connection to a feminine spiritual teacher. And they invited each of us um, to find a passage that we could work with for a year. And then this was an annual thing. When we came back together, we would share what we did that practice. And this line was the practice that I did. And I had a sort of body movement I did with that every day for a year. And it just deepens that quality. And then you come back together and everybody shares both the small kind of little dance that I would do to that passage every day, and each of the people would share what they did for that day. And there was this, through that group intention, it encouraged me and each of us to really deepen our connection to that which we wanted to have more of in our life.
And to me, I just want to underscore what you're saying because that really starts speaking to the power of the group, right? When there's this share, see, to me, it's like thinking about systems, we're starting to harness multiple systems together, our individual system with a greater system with each other's systems, right? And that this starts to multiply kind of the impact of what, and the meaning of that is
Yes.
that how it,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the group, there's so many ways that the group is important. Um, so many ways. And there are some groups that I've been meeting with twice a year for 20 years, right? And in Germany, I have a couple of those groups. And recently, when I was in Ukraine, I was working there with a group, which was also a really beautiful experience because I only had like a weekend to be with these people. But by doing the practices that I'm doing some of the card exercises that I'm doing some of the singing together and moving together, um, really their hearts were able to step back from the protectors. I mean, in Ukraine, when you're in a war zone, I mean, the protectors are in the foreground. They have to be in the foreground, right? And but that closes the heart space for people,
yes,
right? And there were some people that I worked with there that were carrying particularly difficult energy. They had been working with trauma, torture survivors, right? And and they were really struggling with the energy that they collected in their system from that. And it was also an energy that I could feel I really needed to work
Mm.
to deal with and protect myself, to be in relationship to. And then when I was leaving Ukraine, I was on a train, and on this train were about coming out of were 50 Hasidic Jewish guys who had been at a Rosh Hashanah celebration in the near Odessa with, I think there were like, I don't know, there were tens of thousands of Hasidic Jewish guys went to this special place, Reb Nachman von Breslov. And but I didn't know why they were there. I just knew they were on the train. And I'm on the train now from Ukraine to Krakow, right? And we know that that train with 50 Jewish guys, and I know that that train carried hundreds of thousands of Jewish people to their death in Auschwitz,
Mm.
right next to Krakow, right? And somehow the fact that I had been in the war zone and working with people, and then I just felt the energy. I was on the same track, right? That this happened,
Mm.
and I was really shattered. Actually, I was kind of shattered by the experience, and um, there were a couple things that I was doing. I had some ways to kind of heal myself that I managed to. I was on actually, my plane was canceled out of Krakow. I was supposed to fly back to Germany, and it was canceled. So I had an extra night there. And I was able to return to some of my healing practices to cleanse from some of the heavy energy I collected. And one of those healing practices is to kind of wash myself in light, right?
Yes.
And it was to connect to spirit and wash myself in light, and to have a stream of light. It's a little bit like this waterfall right up here. You see behind me?
Yeah, it's
I
beautiful.
have that when I'm doing my Zoom work. So I remember to connect to that waterfall of light before especially if I think I'm going to encounter any kind of the heavy, intense, dark energy. Anyway, and then in me, there were though some dark spots that wouldn't wash away,
Mm.
right? That I picked up. And and then for some reason, I remembered that a sense that there was light at the center of those dark things. And as I did
Mm.
that, and I just honored the light that was at the core of this darkness, it began to dissolve.
Yes.
And the next day, I was at the airport. Our plane was delayed again. There were actually 50 Hasidic guys waiting with me for this plane ride. And I finally found some that could speak English. They were mostly speaking Yiddish. And uh, the I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, we've been going to this place with Reb Nachman." And I said, "Who is this Reb Nachman?" "Well, he's 200 years ago. He did this and that, and he's, so they said, come to this celebration every year if you can, or at least once in your life." Um, and I said, "Well, tell me about this guy." And he says, "Well, he's really interesting because he talks about, maybe you have some parts of yourself that you think are bad." He said, "But in the center of those parts is a spark of light, and just focus on the spark of light in those bad parts." And I thought,
Wow.
oh my goodness, 2 hours earlier that had come to me. So the universe was kind of taking care of me, right? So I felt like, okay, so there's some reason that I'm in the midst of this heavy turmoil now. But I was also very glad I was going back to a group that I worked with. And so I went back, and in this group of about 30 people, I could share my shatteredness, right? And because I still hadn't returned to myself, I was still struggling with really the pain of the Holocaust that I sensed on the train trip,
Yes.
and um, the sense of hope of being able to deal with it, but also not being able to deal with it just that way, even though I had my spiritual source and I had this. But I came together with the group, and one of the people in the group, we began to sing together and to sing some healing songs that I hadn't known, right?
Mm.
And as we sang together, moved together, shared together, and of course, I was in Germany, so the Germans sharing their own history of their participation, their family's historical participation in the Holocaust, and the parts that they were carrying, and the so there was a huge, work with that that we had this dark energy that needed to be worked with as a group. And I sense that don't know how that could ever have been worked with alone, or even with two, or even with the source, right? It was only by helping that group tune together that we were able to bring a sense of healing um, of that.
Yes. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And to me, well, one, again, it just speaks to this quality of your of one thing I'm so just seeing, in you as a human, your approach to your life and just being on the train, just being with that which is, and that openness and that curiosity that's driving as just this facet of, and of course, when we're in that, then you're the synchronicity of how you're being led and what is emerging is just as a note that's being played throughout, throughout, right? As one thing. And then also what the other thing that really strikes me and is, you know, when there's collective trauma, but trauma that's done to groups. I mean, to bring up, like, I don't know how much I can deal with this. To me, you're speaking so clearly and authentically and vulnerably, especially as the group leader, which it really is. To me, I feel it's important to underscore that leadership is not that I have it all together.
Right.
You're leading with your own heart and your own authenticity. And I mean, that must have been, I mean, there's so many layers to this. I mean, how useful and healing to be in a group that you had helped form and lead, and then to then be on the receiving end of that. And then the layer of bringing that which is not, I would almost wonder, and you're curious your thoughts, I almost wonder if things like this, that individual sense of I cannot hold this alone, it's almost intended to be healed in a group. Like it's the experience is that.
The collective traumas that we're talking about, those
Yes, like it's
traumas almost have to be healed in a group. I mean, and one of the things, this is the way a sense of the synchronicity is. So that was before October 7th, right? This was in the end of September. Then October 7th happened, and then I went to the IFS conference. And at the IFS conference, there was, obviously a sense of the burden of the horrors that were happening in Israel and Palestine, and both sides suffering. And there was tension between the communities within the conference itself, right? And that in some of the work, there was an attempt to kind of create space that could hold that. But it felt to me like the container hadn't been offered that would really hold that.
yes.
And I was so happy that my workshop happened to be the last workshop, and it was on spirituality and IFS, and the path of the heart. And so in my workshop, that song that I had learned that was so healing
Mm.
at at my workshop after the Krakow experience was the using the Aramaic phrase Shalom Beta, which Shalom is peace be upon, and then Beta is this house. It's peace be upon this house. And it was what Jesus said to his disciples: if you're going to visit someone, as you pass into their house, say Shalom Beta. So it's really a wish for may peace be upon this house. And I had sensed that at so many levels, peace be upon our inner house of our parts,
Yeah.
peace in our community, peace be upon the nation. And so it was such a healing song. It has it's like Shalom, Shalom Beta,
Mm.
Shalom, Shalom Beta, Shalom, Shalom Beta, Shalom, Shalom Beta.
Mm.
So there's this beautiful song. And so what I did is I gathered some people to my workshop who would help me, because we had about 70, 80 people in it. And as people came in, I had them singing that,
Wow.
um, so that people understood, okay, we're all coming down into this space together, right? And that was also, well, we ended the workshop with that song, um, and some dance movements in relationship to that.
Wow.
So, and to me, it felt deeply, deeply like offering a container for the that which, can't be transformed, but it can be held, right? And
Yes.
as it's held, it begins to dissolve some, at least the intensity of the pain is dissolved.
Yes.
Heart expands. I like that Buddhist concept of if you have a spacious heart, it's like if you put ink into a small piece of water, it's all black. But that same amount of ink into a large, vast space, is transparent. So it's the same
Wow.
pain, but if you open up the space that's holding it, right, it's not so dark. And um,
I
yeah,
love that. Wow. It's such a beautiful sharing. And to me, and I really appreciate again there, because I feel like it's such and I know you do work on tuning the heart of the healer, I think is how you called that. Is, and to me, you're such a living example of that, of you're right. I mean, of both. It because I feel like if we're separating ourselves from that process, it doesn't, I'm not saying it's about us. That's not what it is, but it's that we are part of it is your willingness to be the vessel or the conduit or the expression of it, and also then opening it into others' own expression of
yes,
it, because
yes,
then it allows for this expression that's very, it's healing. It's the nature of it, right?
yes. And the resonance then goes out, right? And in whatever form. And the beauty of like in the group like that is that you have 70 or 80 people, each with unique characteristics, each with unique ways of bringing their message to the world. One of the things that I like to, in this tuning the heart workshop, I like to sense is helping people to find the song of their heart,
Mm.
right? What is it in their soul, in their very essence, that wants to be sung, that wants to have form, that wants to come into the world, right? And not to set it up as I have to be more compassionate, I have to be more, it's no, like what's the song that wants to be sung? And if you sing that from the center of who you are, it will be beautiful and it will express the qualities that are the essential qualities that we're trying to nourish, right? But in the form that you bring them, right? And it doesn't have
Yes.
to be my form,
No,
right?
and I so appreciate that, because and to me it really does speak to like why I think of birds singing. Like every bird that sings, it's singing it in its own way. And and even though the song is the same, quote unquote, but it's not, in its own way, in its own individual expression. And that I so love this. As you know, let's start to wrap this up. And is there anything, I'm curious if is there a way in which you're, like if people want to work with you, or something that you're doing next that you want to people know about? I mean, there's your website.
Yeah, I mean, on the website, there's there's other videos, there's some brief videos, there's some longer videos that talk a little bit about my work. There's some ways of working with the cards. I just mentioned the cards, but there's videos of how to use the cards, what they are. We now have three sets of cards. We have the original ones from the Artist of the Parts Work, the illustrated guidebook, the first book of mine. Um, and we have a set of cards from the refugees in Syria, where I was from Syria, who are in Jordan, where I worked in the Middle East for 4 or 5 years, supporting the mental health system and workers in those countries. And we wanted cards that would fit their culture. So those cards are there, but they've also been very useful to anybody in a refugee situation. Those cards were very useful in Ukraine because it spoke of war and flight and refugees. And then we have a third set of cards now that you can see on my website that I'm sure you can get my website at the end of this.
Yeah.
Um, where it's done by a Black artist in the States, representing more that which in Black culture um, it needs to be expressed and told, and is in terms of their parts and their inner systems, what they're coping with. So we have at least those three sets of cards now. Um, so there's a little more diversity in them than there has been at the beginning. Um, so yeah, that's the kind of a few resources. The first book, The Parts Work, the Illustrated Guide, it continues to sell, I think, because therapists often give it to their clients, so the clients understand what this parts work is all about, right? But it's also just it's an easy access book, and it's got so many pictures, and it's that help us to understand what the IFS model is all about. The second book, The Parts Work, The Path of the Heart, has much more, as I said earlier, about the healing journeys and how spirituality comes in to the IFS process. And um, I just had this wish in that book. I had this wish of having some of these stories told. And the nice thing was the stories that I told were often, they were by therapists who were, people who were, I knew well and worked well with, and some of them are telling them with their names, and I could then give it to them and say, is this what your experience was? And it's also kind of detailed um, transcripts from sessions, so people can see exactly what the process was. So for people who are interested, those books might be doing something. If they're interested, I mean, I'm going to do a workshop next May in the Pendle Hill in Philadelphia, where I do a Tuning the Heart, Healing the Healer workshop. So if anybody is in that part of the country, they might be interested in that. It'd be like a 3.5 day workshop doing that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing your heart and for really allowing this really beautiful work that you're doing in the world and just your authenticity and the the way in which you're showing up with this. I just feel like it's such a beautiful, um, you know, it's just a beautiful story in and of itself about your own path and how you're using that to really assist and serve others. It's just a great, really beautiful example of that.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to share some of my journey. I know that I feel incredibly fortunate to have found this path and to have or been guided to this path, however it happens, but made choices, I guess, to stay with it and on it. I think that's kind of our role is we're kind of presented with some choices, and are we going to make life space for it, or are we going to let other parts of ourselves dominate how we
Yeah.
use it? And I retired, 16 years ago from the university because I knew that my path, the song of my heart, could not be sung at the university. It was too narrow and confined. So I needed to travel the world to sing that song.
I love it.
Yeah. Thanks for helping me share a little bit of that tune.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I love it so much.